Sutra18. Prakāśa-kriyā-sthiti-śīlaṃ. Bhūtendriyātmakaṃ. Bhoga-pavargārtham. dṛśyam. Prakāśa-kriyā-sthiti-śīlaṃ. Bhūtendriyātmakaṃ. Bhoga-pavargārtham. That one's a tough word. Bhoga-pavargārtham. dṛśyam. Okay. Of luminosity, light, cognition, consciousness of activity and steadiness, stability, having the properties or qualities, elements, sense organs, being of the nature, experience, and liberation for the sake of, with the purpose of, is the seen, prakṛti. The seen, objective side of manifestation, consists of the elements and sense organs, is of the nature of cognition, activity, and stability, sattva, rajas, tamas, the guṇas, right? And has for its purpose providing the purusha with experience and liberation. In Sutra 18, we see how the masterminds who developed the science of yoga had the capacity to go to the heart of every matter, and after separating the essential from the non-essential, could grasp and formulate the essential facts. In one brief sutra, Patanjali has analyzed and placed before us the fundamental facts concerning the essential nature of the phenomenal world and its perception and purpose. First, he gives the essential nature of all phenomenon, which are the objects of perception. These, according to the well-known conception of Hindu philosophy, are really made up of the three gunas, the nature of which will be explained later on. He then points out that the perception of the phenomenal world is really the result of the interactions of the bhutas and indriyas, the elements and sense organs. And lastly, he points out the purpose and function of the phenomenal world, which is twofold. Firstly, to provide experience for the purushas who seem to be evolving in it, and secondly, through this experience, to lead them gradually to emancipation and enlightenment. It is necessary to note that the word used for the phenomenal world is dṛśyam, that which is seen or is capable of being seen. The contact of purusha and prakṛti results in the emergence of a duality, which in modern language may be called the subjective and objective sides of nature. Of these, the purusha is the essence or substratum of the subjective, and prakṛti that of the objective side of this duality. As consciousness recedes inwards, the dividing line between the subjective and objective shifts continually, but the relation between the two remains the same. The purusha, with all the vehicles which have not been separated off from his consciousness, constitutes the subjective part of this dual relationship and is called dṛśyam, or seer. That portion of prakṛti which has been separated off in this manner constitutes the objective part and is called dṛśyam, or seen. Both dṛśya and dṛśyam are thus necessary for the phenomenal world. So you have to have a seer in order for there to be a seen, and there has to be something to be seen by the seer, right? Let us first consider the essential nature of all phenomenon which are the objects of perception. These, according to the present sutra, are the result of the play of the three gunas, which find expression through cognition, activity, and stability. The theory of gunas forms an integral part of Hindu philosophy, and the whole structure of the manifested universe, according to this philosophy, is considered to rest on these three fundamental qualities or attributes of prakṛti. In fact, according to the Samkhya doctrine, even prakṛti is nothing but a condition of perfect equilibrium of the three gunas, triguna samyavashta, triguna samyavashta. Although the theory of gunas is one of the fundamental doctrines of Hindu philosophy, it is surprising how little it is understood. The gunas are referred to over and over again in the Bhagavad Gita. There is hardly any important book in Sanskrit dealing with religion or philosophy in which the word triguna does not occur, and yet nobody seems to know what the three gunas really stand for. There is a vague idea that they have something to do with properties, because the word guna in Sanskrit generally means a property or attribute. That is also the general impression which the various contexts in which the word is used seem to produce, but one looks in vain for any clear exposition of the real significance of the word, or what it really stands for in terms of modern thought. It is not difficult to understand why the nature of the gunas is so difficult to comprehend. They lie at the very basis of the manifested world, and even the working of the mind through which we try to comprehend their nature depends upon their interplay. Isn't that fascinating? Trying to comprehend the nature of the gunas with the help of the mind is like trying to catch the hand with a pair of tongs held by the hand. Not until the yogi crosses the boundary of manifestation and transcends the domain of the gunas, as indicated in section 4, Sutra 34, can he realize their true nature. But this does not mean that the student of yoga cannot understand their nature at all and should remain satisfied with the vague and nebulous notions which are generally prevalent with regard to this basic doctrine. The advances which have taken place in the field of physical sciences and the light which this has thrown on the structure of matter and the nature of physical phenomenon has now placed us in a position to be able to gain a faint glimpse into the essential nature of the gunas. It is true that this knowledge is connected with the superficial aspects of the gunas, but the student can, by the exercise of deep thought and intuition, gain some understanding of the subject enough to convince him that the gunas are not a mere elusive phantom of philosophy, but are part of that profound mystery which surrounds the founding of a manifest universe. This is not the place to deal exhaustively with this interesting but abstruse subject, but a few ideas may be discussed to enable the student to know in which direction he should seek for more knowledge if he wants to understand the subject more fully. This discussion will involve some knowledge of modern scientific ideas, though an effort will be made to keep it as free from technicalities as possible. After all, if we want to understand any problem in terms of modern scientific facts, we must have at least a general knowledge of those facts. What is the essential nature of the phenomenon which we perceive through the instrumentality of the sense organs? The first point we should note in arriving at an answer to this question is that an object of perception will be found on analysis to consist of a number of properties or dharmas cognized through the sense organs. That every object is merely a bundle of properties, and our knowledge with regard to that object is confined to the direct or indirect observation of these properties, is a well-known philosophical concept which every student can understand. The second question which arises is, what is the nature of these properties, or rather, on what does the cognition of these properties depend? If we analyze the flux of physical phenomenon around us in the light of modern scientific knowledge, we shall find three principles of a fundamental character underlying all of these phenomena. These three principles, which ultimately determine the nature of every phenomenon, are all connected with motion and may be called different aspects of motion. It is very difficult to express these principles by means of single words, for no words with a sufficiently comprehensive meaning are known, but for want of better words, we may call them 1. Vibration, which involves rhythmic motion of particles. 2. Mobility, which involves non-rhythmic motion of particles with transference of energy. And 3. Inertia, which involves relative position of particles. These principles are really the three fundamental aspects of motion and may be crudely illustrated respectively by a number of soldiers drilling on a parade ground, a number of people walking in a crowd, and a number of prisoners confined in separate cells. Whatever the nature of the phenomenon, we shall find at the basis of that phenomenon these principles working in various ways and determining the dharmas or properties which are manifest. Let us take, for the sake of illustration, one by one, the sensuous phenomenon which are observed through the 5 sense organs. The cognition of visual phenomenon depends upon the presence of light vibrations. The cognition of visual phenomenon depends upon the presence of light vibrations, which by their action on the retina of the eye give the impression of form and color. Auditory phenomenon depends upon sound vibrations, which acting upon the drum of the ear, produce the sensation of sound. The sensation of heat, etc., depends upon the impact of moving atoms and molecules on the skin. The sensations of taste and smell depend upon the action of chemical substances on the membranes of the palate and nose. The nature of the chemical substance, which is determined by the relative position and the nature of the atoms in the molecules, determining the sensation which is experienced. In every case, we find vibration or rhythmic motion, mobility or irregular motion, inertia or relative position at work and determining the nature of the sensuous phenomenon. Up to this time, we have assumed the presence of particles which by their motion determine the phenomenon. But what are these particles? Science tells us that these particles are also nothing but combinations of protons, neutrons, and electrons, the electrons whirling around the nucleus of protons and neutrons at tremendous speed and determining the properties of the atoms. In view of the discovery of the equivalence and interconvertibility of mass and energy, it will probably be found ultimately that the nucleus of the atom is also an expression of energy and that the ultimate basis of the manifest physical universe is nothing but motion or energy. The day this is proved conclusively, materialism of the orthodox type will be buried forever, and the philosophy of yoga will be fully vindicated. We see, therefore, that all properties can be reduced to their simplest elements: wave, motion, prakāśa, action, kriya, and position, sthiti, at least as far as the physical universe is concerned. And since these are also the ideas associated with the nature of the 3 gunas, science has to a certain extent corroborated the theory of gunas. It is true that the gunas underlie the whole manifested universe, and not only the physical world, and so we cannot comprehend their true nature by simply taking into account their physical manifestations. But a study of their interplay in the physical world may help the student to gain a faint glimpse into their real nature and the truth underlying section 4, Sutra 13. And let's see what that is. They, whether manifest or unmanifest, are of the nature of gunas. Oops, I lost my page. Okay. There is one other important point we have to understand in relation to the gunas if we would grasp the significance of ideas given in section 356 and section 434. Well, section 356 is, Kaivalya is attained when there is equality of purity between the purusha and sattva. So, between the being, the seer, the experiencer, and purity, right? And then section 434. Kaivalya is the state of enlightenment following reemergence of the gunas because of their becoming devoid of the object of the purusha. In this state, the purusha is established in his real nature, which is pure consciousness. Fini. That lets us know that's the last sutra in the Yoga Sutras. Okay. All right. So let me read this again. There is one other important point we have to understand in relation to the gunas if we would grasp the significance of ideas given in section 356 and section 434. This point is connected with the relation of the 3 gunas to one another. Every student of elementary science So I put a little pencil mark here next to this next chapter, so let's see what this is about. Every student of elementary science knows that wave motion or vibration is a harmonious combination of mobility and inertia. And if the three gunas are connected, as we have seen, with these three aspects of motion, it follows that sattva is merely a harmonious combination of rajas and tamas, and is not anything apart from rajas and tamas. So the development of sattva is not really the creation of something new, but the harmonization of the existing rajas and tamas. This fact is very important because it serves to throw some light on the relation of the purusha and sattva, which is, so that's what we just read in that last sutra that we jumped forward to. When the purusha comes in contact with prakṛti at the beginning of the evolutionary cycle, his contact disturbs the equilibrium of the three gunas and gradually brings into play the forces of prakṛti. Through this disturbed atmosphere, the purusha cannot see his svarupa, because this svarupa can be expressed or reflected only through a sufficiently purified sattva guna, right? Because of all the veils. In the early stages of evolution, this question does not arise. The vehicles of consciousness are slowly being organized, and the powers latent in prakṛti are being unfolded. But after evolution has reached a sufficiently advanced stage, and the desire for self-realization is born within the soul, rajas and tamas have to be replaced gradually by sattva. So he's basically saying, sattva is still kind of present, like after the first few veils have been dropped, and we're receding back into the different koshas, right? Involution, we're still in the involution phase. But once we get down here to the base level, rajas and tamas are really active, right? And they're very thick and heavy, and they pretty much have us all encased. So sattva becomes less. So now, as we start to come back up again, and the desire for liberation is born, we start to mix a little more sattva in there. But he's saying now rajas and tamas create sattvas. So beautiful. Okay, but after evolution has reached a sufficiently advanced stage and the desire for self-realization is born within the soul, rajas and tamas have to be replaced gradually by sattva. So the object in yoga is to harmonize rajas and tamas into sattva. And as it is the harmonization of two opposites, a perfect harmonization means really the virtual disappearance of the opposites and the attainment of a condition which is free from the opposites. The question now arises, is the triguna samyavasta, right? The question now arises, is the triguna samyavasta before the purusha came in contact with prakṛti exactly the same as the condition of pure sattva developed after going through the evolutionary cycle and attaining Kaivalya? So I would think no, because I would think that now after going through that process, that it's actually more evolved, right? If that's what we're here to do, then why would we go through that unless it was going to benefit us and put us at a higher state when we finish going through it? The answer to this question must be in the negative, right? Because if the two conditions were the same, the whole purpose of evolution, as outlined in section 2, Sutra 23, would be defeated, right? It would really amount to supposing that the purusha descends into matter, goes through the long and tedious evolutionary cycle, and then again lapses into the condition from which he started. What would be the point? If these two conditions are not identical, what is the difference between them? Let's find out. This is not the place to enter into this highly philosophical question, but an analogy from the field of science may serve to throw some light on the nature of the difference. Good. A condition of equilibrium may be of two kinds, which we may, for the sake of convenience, call static and dynamic. In static equilibrium, two equal and opposite things combine in such a manner that the combination is a dead thing. You cannot get anything out of the combination because it does not contain potentially any power. If we mix together equivalent quantities of an acid and a base, two opposites, we get a neutral salt from which we cannot get anything else. On the other hand, it is possible to produce a harmonious equilibrium of two equal and opposite things, which is dynamic and contains potential power. Take a storage battery. In it lie two opposite kinds of electricity combined equally and harmoniously. Outwardly, the battery also appears a dead or inert thing, but only outwardly. We have only to connect the two poles to see the difference. Now, the equilibrium of sattva is something analogous to this equilibrium in a storage battery. It contains potentially the power to produce any combination of the gunas as required, and yet reverting instantaneously to the original condition when the power is not needed. So he's basically saying that rajas and tamas arise from sattva. Right? So then if we learn how to master that, we can create any combination that we want in this world, right? It is in this sense that the recession of the gunas to their original in section 4, Sutra 34, should be understood. The gunas do not cease to function permanently for the self-realized Purusha. They cease to function when he withdraws into himself and comes into play as soon as he projects his consciousness outward. In short, they lose their independent activity and become merely his instruments, which is what I just said, right? This conception of the gunatita state, this conception of the gunatita state not only imparts a new significance to the evolutionary cycle, but is also in accordance with facts as known to occultism. The mighty adepts of yoga who emerge as jivan muktas from the evolutionary cycle do not merge into God and become indistinguishable from him by losing their identity forever. They become free from the domination of the gunas and the illusion of prakṛti, and yet retain all the knowledge and powers which they have acquired through evolution. Of all the misconceptions and partially understood truths of Hindu philosophy, perhaps none is more absurd and a travesty of the real facts than this idea of Purusha merging completely with God and being lost in him forever. If a human being were to erect a house and then demolish it as soon as it was completed, we should consider him mad. But we attribute to God a worse kind of irrationality in believing that on the attainment of jivan mukti, jivatma merges with the paramatma and is lost forever. Having considered the nature of the material basis of the phenomenal world, let us now pass on to the second generalization contained in the sutra, which gives the modus operandi of the perception of this world. How is this world, which is the result of the interplay of the gunas, perceived? What are the basic elements involved in this perception? The answer to this question, again, is contained in a generalization, which is a masterpiece of analytic technique. According to yogic philosophy, there are only two factors involved in perception, the bhutas and the indriyas. What these bhutas and indriyas are, and how, by their interaction, they produce an awareness of the external world in the consciousness of the Purusha, has been explained to some extent in discussing section 345 and section 348. Let's go there. Section 345. Mastery over the panchabhutas by performing samyama on their gross, constant, subtle, all-pervading, and functional states. Mastery over the sense organs by performing samyama on their power of cognition, real nature, egoism, all-pervasiveness, and functions. Let me read that last sentence one more time. What these bhutas and indriyas are, and how by their interaction they produce an awareness of the external world in the consciousness of the Purusha has been explained to some extent in discussing 45 and 48. We need not therefore enter into this question here, but there is one important fact which may be pointed out before we pass on to the third generalization of the sutra. The word bhutas and indriyas are used in the widest sense of these terms and have reference to the physical as well as the superphysical planes. The mechanism through which consciousness becomes aware of objects differs from plane to plane, but the modus operandi of this mechanism on every plane is essentially the same, namely the interaction of the bhutas and the indriyas. Not only is the modus operandi the same on all the planes, but the 5 states of the bhutas and indriyas referred to in 45 and 48 are also the same on all the planes. Samyama on these states will therefore lead to the mastery of the bhutas and the indriyas on all planes. So I'm sure you've realized throughout your life, I was thinking about this the other day, so how the different seeds show up, the different aspects of the different seeds show up, and the different combinations of the different seeds show up in different areas of your life. So I wonder, it's okay, you've come up a rung, you've grown and evolved to a certain degree, but here's that issue again. Here's that same kind of situation or circumstance again. I guess that's the bhutas and the indriyas, utilizing the seeds to manifest certain things so that you can get it on that level. And you're okay, I get it. Because it's the same as it was down here, except now it's up here, and it's manifesting this way, and I have to exercise a little bit more of my awareness, of my consciousness, of my discipline, of my detachment, of my steady practice, of the wisdom I've attained to get through this, right? To resolve that or experience that on a higher level. And then I go up to the next plane, right? Where I go through it again on a higher level. The third generalization in this sutra gives the purpose of the phenomenal world. This is to provide experience and ultimately liberation for the Purusha. It is in some way, which is not quite comprehensible to the intellect, necessary for the Purusha to descend into matter and pass through the evolutionary process before he can become perfect and free from the domination of matter. The phenomenal world provides for him the necessary experiences through which alone evolution of his vehicles and unfolding of his consciousness can take place. As the seed, after being sown, absorbs the necessary nutriment from its environment and gradually develops into a full-grown tree after the likeness of its progenitor, in the same way, the germ of divine life, when it is put in the phenomenal world, is acted upon by all kinds of stimuli and influences, and gradually unfolds the divine life and powers which are hidden within it. As this idea has been discussed fully later in the connection with Sutra 23 in this section, we shall not consider it here. The yogic idea that the phenomenal world definitely exists for the growth and perfection of the individual centers of consciousness is in refreshing contrast to the bleak and vain speculations of modern science on the origin and purpose of this manifested universe. The idea that this wonderfully and beautifully designed universe in which we live has no purpose is really an insult to human intelligence, and yet it is tacitly accepted by the large majority of modern scientists or the so-called intellectuals. If you ask the average scientist what he has to say about the purpose behind the universe, he will most probably show his impatience and reply that he does not know and does not care to know. He has very conveniently put aside the question of why of the universe so that he may be able to devote himself to the how, without being pestered by any uncomfortable doubts with regard to the utility of what he is doing. The most convenient way of avoiding your pursuers is to shut your eyes and forget about them. Okay, so the next one, Sutra 19, which I will do in the next video, is the stages of the gunas are the particular, the universal, the undifferentiated, and the differentiated. And we will read that one in the next video.